There is an old story told in psychology textbooks, a tale meant to warn us about the dangers of isolation. In a series of experiments, scientists placed mice into complete solitary confinement. The results were grim. The animals developed severe stress behaviors, grew neurotic, and eventually died much earlier than their peers. This story became a kind of cultural fable, proof that loneliness is poisonous, that no living creature designed for social life can survive alone for long. Yet, what is rarely mentioned is that when mice were forced to live in constant company, with no opportunity for retreat or privacy, they developed similar patterns of breakdown. Crowded cages produced aggression, compulsions, and illnesses that mirrored the damage of isolation. Too much solitude crushed them, but too much togetherness did the same. The real insight is not that we must always be social, nor that we must always be alone, but that the balance between the two determines whether we wither or thrive. A German philosopher of the 19th century recognized this paradox long before modern laboratories ran their tests. He observed with brutal clarity, solitude is the destiny of all exceptional minds. For him, being alone was not punishment, but a requirement for independence of thought and spirit. Yet he also warned against the despair of forced isolation, the kind of solitude that feels like exile rather than choice. He understood what society still resists admitting today. There is a crucial difference between loneliness imposed from outside and solitude chosen from within. One corrodes, the other can liberate. Think of the modern world. We glorify connectivity. We count followers, we measure likes. We treat constant notifications as proof that we are alive. At the same time, we treat being alone as a pathology. If someone dines alone, we feel pity. If someone spends a weekend in silence, we assume they are depressed. But what if our aversion to solitude is not a sign of health, but a sign of weakness? What if our inability to sit quietly with ourselves signals not strength, but poverty of inner life? The philosopher was merciless on this point. He wrote, "Most men are so poor within themselves that they cannot bear their own company." Harsh words, perhaps, but words that strike close to the heart of modern experience. How many people scroll endlessly through feeds, not out of joy, but out of fear of the silence that would rise up if they stopped? How many endure toxic company simply to avoid a night alone with their own thoughts? Picture a city on a Friday night. Bars are loud, streets are crowded, screens glow in every direction. You can almost see the discomfort on people's faces. Many are not there because they truly want to be, but because solitude frightens them more than noise, more than exhaustion. They fear the apartment that waits empty. They fear the silence that would confront them if they stayed home. In that fear lies the essence of the paradox. To escape the discomfort of our own company, we accept discomfort in the company of others. Psychology today echoes what the philosopher intuited 2 centuries ago. The inability to enjoy solitude is often a mask for something deeper, the fear of encountering unfiltered thoughts and emotions. It is why we feel restless when our phones die. It is why we flip on the television the second we walk into an empty room. It is why silence makes us squirm. Evolution gave us a survival instinct to fear being cast out from the tribe. For once upon a time, banishment meant almost certain death. But modern society has transformed that instinct into pathology, the inability to tolerate our own being. The philosopher's reflections were not just private musings, but a challenge. He believed that the more a person has within, the less he needs from the world outside. In other words, our ability to tolerate solitude is a measure of our inner wealth. Those who cannot sit alone for even an hour are often those who have invested the least in cultivating their own mind and spirit. The silence of solitude, far from being empty, becomes the stage on which genuine thought, authentic desire, and unfinished creativity appear. The first step into solitude is rarely comfortable. Psychologists describe the initial stage as dopamine hunger. Our brains, trained by constant stimulation and social feedback, protest when cut off. Anxiety rises, restlessness grows. We feel an almost physical itch to escape. Many give up at this threshold, believing the discomfort is proof that something is wrong. It shows that something is beginning. Growth starts precisely at the point where the noise falls away and the self finally steps forward. Consider this. Without solitude, how would we ever hear the questions that truly matter? Who am I when no one is watching? What do I really want from life? Does the path I follow reflect my own values or merely the expectations of others? These questions are terrifying, and they are meant to be. They shake the fragile sets of our social identities. Only in solitude can they arise. The paradox of loneliness is not a puzzle to be solved, but a condition to be recognized. Too much isolation destroys. Too much company corrodes. But chosen solitude, solitude entered freely and embraced intentionally, holds the power to transform. It is in this space that true freedom can be found. Freedom from roles, from performance, from disguise. Freedom to face oneself without mediation or excuse. This is where our journey begins. If you notice your own urge to escape solitude, pause. If you feel anxiety rising when silence surrounds you, stay. Do not flee immediately into noise. For in that moment of discomfort lies the very doorway through which every thinker, every creator, every person who has ever broken free from mediocrity has walked. Loneliness is not only absence, it can be presence, the presence of yourself, undiluted, unperformed, and unafraid. Why do we run from silence as if it were fire? Why is the empty room so threatening that many prefer the dull roar of background noise to the sound of their own breathing? The answer lies not only in culture, but in the mechanics of the human brain. We are wired to seek stimulation. We are conditioned to equate busyness with meaning. And we are trained, almost from childhood, to view solitude as failure rather than opportunity. Consider the moment you reach for your phone without thinking. The screen lights up and delivers a tiny hit of dopamine. A message arrives, a notification blinks, a timeline scrolls endlessly forward. None of these signals matter much in themselves, but the brain interprets them as proof that you are part of a tribe. You belong. You are seen. Yet underneath that fleeting satisfaction is dependency. The habit of checking is not about curiosity, but about avoiding the awkwardness of your own company. Modern technology did not invent this reflex, but it amplified it beyond recognition. For most of human history, solitude was inevitable. The farmer working his field, the traveler walking miles to the next village, the sailor staring at the horizon for weeks on end. In every life, there were stretches of silence that no one could avoid. Now, silence is the rarest commodity. Music fills every store, podcasts fill every commute, screens glow in every pocket. What was once a natural rhythm of life now feels like an unnatural deprivation. Psychologists call this stimulus shielding. We build walls of noise and images to shield ourselves from the rawness of being alone. The constant hum of activity acts as armor against self-reflection. Yet armor that is never removed becomes a prison. The more we shield, the less capable we are of tolerating exposure. It becomes a vicious cycle. The less we practice solitude, the more intolerable solitude becomes. This cycle can be observed everywhere. A young professional who cannot sit through lunch without streaming videos. A student who cannot study without headphones blasting. A parent who fills every silence with chatter or television. The fear is not boredom itself, but what boredom reveals. When external stimulation fades, internal voices grow louder. Doubts, desires, regrets, and questions rise. Many find this unbearable, so they drown it again in distraction. Neuroscience provides a map of this process. When we engage constantly with external stimuli, our brains run on what scientists call the social default network. This network evolved to monitor hierarchies, anticipate reactions, and navigate the complexities of group life. It is valuable for survival, but it also reinforces conformity. It keeps us tuned to what others expect, not what we truly want. Extended solitude, however, activates different networks: focused attention, task-oriented circuits, states of deeper integration where unexpected connections and insights occur. Creativity is less about brilliance than about giving the mind enough stillness to rearrange the pieces it already holds. The philosopher saw this in less technical language. He argued that those who cannot endure silence reveal a deep poverty of spirit. Modern science echoes him. The ability to be alone correlates with resilience, originality, and emotional clarity. The inability to be alone correlates with anxiety, compulsions, and shallow attachments. Yet society frames solitude as pathology and constant connection as virtue. We celebrate the person always available, always responsive, always surrounded by others. We treat stillness as waste and withdrawal as weakness. One of the strangest experiments ever conducted shows how far this fear can go. In 2014, researchers at the University of Virginia placed volunteers in an empty room for just 15 minutes. They were given no devices, no books, no distractions. The only object in the room was a button that delivered an electric shock. To the surprise of the researchers, 2/3 of the men and 1/4 of the women chose to shock themselves rather than sit quietly with their thoughts. They preferred physical pain to silence. That finding speaks volumes about the modern condition. Avoidance of solitude takes many disguises. Some people chase endless social events. Others cling to relationships they know are unhealthy. Still others bury themselves in work or digital noise. Each strategy is a form of running, a refusal to stop long enough to feel the weight of one's own existence. The irony is that the more we run, the less free we become. We build lives that look busy, but feel empty. Crowded schedules that leave us lonelier than solitude ever could. The escape from silence also has evolutionary roots. In prehistoric environments, isolation often meant vulnerability to predators and exclusion from resources. Fear of being alone was adaptive. But in a world of modern safety nets and endless connectivity, that fear is outdated. It lingers like an old reflex that no longer serves. The challenge now is to unlearn it, to reclaim solitude as skill rather than stigma. There is an instructive contrast between solitude chosen and solitude imposed. Forced isolation, like that endured in prisons or neglect, damages the psyche. But voluntary solitude, framed as retreat rather than exile, strengthens it. The distinction is crucial. One empties the spirit, the other fills it. Society often conflates the two, teaching us to fear all aloneness as abandonment. Yet those who practice voluntary solitude know it as a source of renewal. Everyday life offers clues. That uneasy twitch when you leave your phone at home, that compulsion to check messages at a stoplight, that sigh of relief when a television hums in the background. These are not trivial habits. They are symptoms of dependency on distraction. To reclaim autonomy, one must face the withdrawal. Just as breaking any addiction requires enduring discomfort, learning to be alone requires enduring the first wave of restlessness without surrendering to it. The philosopher framed solitude as a mirror. Stand before it long enough, and you see the contours of your mind that company often hides. Stand before it impatiently, and you see only distortion. Modern life encourages us to smash the mirror altogether, to never look. Yet mirrors do not create flaws, they only reveal them. To fear solitude is to fear the sight of ourselves. The paradox deepens here. We flee solitude because we equate it with emptiness,
Yet in doing so, we remain empty. We fear silence because it seems barren, yet in noise, we plant nothing. True growth requires soil, and soil requires stillness. Seeds do not sprout in a storm. Minds do not mature in constant chatter. To cultivate anything enduring, solitude is not optional, but essential. Perhaps this is why so many great figures in history guarded their time alone as fiercely as treasure. Writers, inventors, thinkers, leaders, they all carved spaces of silence into noisy lives. They understood what ordinary culture did not. Solitude is not absence, but preparation. It is not a void, but a workshop where raw experience is shaped into understanding. The challenge for us today is sharper than ever. We must learn to step away from devices, to walk without headphones, to sit without screens, to dine without chatter. At first, it feels like deprivation. In time, it feels like liberation. The transition is a training of perception. What seems like nothingness reveals itself as presence, and what seemed like comfort reveals itself as bondage. Only by pausing can we see which is which. To escape solitude is to escape the self, but the self, left unexamined, does not disappear. It waits, growing heavier, demanding reckoning. The question is not whether we will face it, but when. The sooner we stop running, the sooner we discover that the silence we dreaded holds the very clarity we seek. When we step back from the noise of ordinary life, we discover that solitude is not an accident in the story of human achievement. It is a constant. Time and again, the greatest leaps of thought, art, and science emerged not in crowded halls, but in quiet rooms, lonely walks, or silent retreats. What looks like withdrawal from the world often turns out to be a deeper engagement with it. History is filled with examples that prove solitude is not a weakness, but a hidden strength. Take Isaac Newton. In 1665, the Great Plague forced Cambridge University to close. Newton returned to his family home in Woolsthorpe and lived in isolation for almost 2 years. Cut off from professors, classmates, and academic rituals, he spent his days in thought. During that period, he developed the foundations of calculus, explored the nature of light, and began shaping the theory of gravity. Later, he would describe that period as his annus mirabilis, his year of wonders. A global crisis had pushed him into his annus mirabilis. Centuries later, Nikola Tesla spent most of his creative life in near solitude. While he sometimes dazzled audiences with public demonstrations, the real breakthroughs came in quiet hotel rooms where he lived alone, pacing the floor with his notebooks. He claimed he could run experiments entirely in his imagination, visualizing circuits so precisely that he knew whether they would work before ever building them. Tesla's solitude was not exile, but chosen discipline. It allowed him to dive into a world no other. Writers, too, have long known the value of withdrawal. Michel de Montaigne, the French essayist, retreated to a tower on his estate. There, surrounded by his library, he wrote essays that would shape the course of European thought for centuries. His solitude was not sterile silence, but fertile ground. From his tower, he explored friendship, mortality, and the contradictions of human nature. Without his chosen retreat, his reflections would likely have drowned in the noise of court and politics. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American thinker, argued that self-reliance could only be born in moments of detachment from society. He urged his readers to walk into nature alone, to hear their own voice unfiltered by the crowd. His solitude produced essays that still inspire readers to trust the integrity of their inner compass. For Emerson, time away from the swarm of opinion was not indulgence, but necessity.
Without it, individuality could not survive. Friedrich Nietzsche provides another striking case. He spent much of his later life in the Swiss Alps, often in near isolation. From these mountains, he wrote works that would unsettle philosophy for generations. He argued that only in solitude could one confront the deeper truths of existence, free from the suffocating expectations of society. The stark landscapes around him mirrored the starkness of his ideas. He embraced solitude as a crucible in which both suffering and insight were forged. Even artists of sound and image have sought refuge in solitude. Composers such as Beethoven withdrew for long walks through forests, sketchbooks in hand, transforming silence into symphonies. Painters such as Van Gogh found their most powerful visions not in crowded studios, but in quiet rooms lit by a single lamp. For them, solitude was not absence of inspiration, but its most reliable companion. What unites these figures is not a hatred of people, but an understanding of rhythm. They knew that creativity requires alternation, immersion in life followed by retreat, connection balanced by distance. Without silence, impressions remain scattered. Without solitude, ideas cannot consolidate. History shows that solitude is not a side effect of genius, but often its secret engine. Modern psychology explains why. In solitude, the brain enters states that allow deep integration. Experiences once fragmented by constant social feedback are processed, organized, and transformed into insight. This is why Newton's plague years, Tesla's hotel rooms, and Montaigne's tower became laboratories of thought. The silence was not void, but laboratory equipment, invisible, yet essential. Yet solitude does not guarantee greatness. It offers the conditions, not the outcome. What matters is how it is used. Isolation without purpose can lead to despair, but solitude with intention becomes a furnace of clarity. Newton used it to model the heavens. Montaigne used it to examine the soul. Nietzsche used it to challenge morality. Each carved meaning from silence, proving that solitude does not shrink life, but enlarges it. Think of it this way. Crowds show us how to survive, but solitude shows us how to live. In crowds, we learn habits, customs, and manners. Alone, we discover truth, direction, and originality. Both are needed, but one is celebrated while the other is feared. History insists that fear is misplaced. Without solitude, there would be no laws of gravity, no essays on human nature, no symphonies that echo centuries later. Even today, when noise is more constant than ever, echoes of this lesson remain. Scientists retreat into sabbaticals. Writers hide in cabins. Entrepreneurs take silent walks. The form changes, but the principle does not. To create something new requires a break from the familiar. To see beyond the crowd requires stepping outside it. The pattern is clear. Solitude, freely chosen and patiently endured, is a recurring theme in the biographies of those who changed how we see the world. They did not run from people out of bitterness, but stepped away to listen for something deeper. The silence they cultivated was not absence, but presence, the presence of thought that endures after noise has faded.
Solitude is not just an abstract idea, but a discipline that can be cultivated. Like any practice, it begins awkwardly and grows natural with repetition. At first, the silence feels heavy. The absence of distraction feels like deprivation. Yet with time, the mind adjusts, and the space, once dreaded, becomes a sanctuary. Learning to transform solitude from fear into strength requires intention, patience, and method. The first step is simplicity. Begin with small intervals of time. Set aside 15 minutes with no devices, no books, no external noise. Sit with nothing but your thoughts. The early moments will bring restlessness. You may feel the urge to check a screen, to pace the room, to invent errands. Resist. The discomfort is not failure, but initiation. It is the withdrawal of an overstimulated mind. Each time you endure it, you build tolerance, the way muscles grow under strain. As the minutes stretch, shift attention inward. Observe thoughts without judgment. Notice how quickly the mind reaches for distraction. Notice how emotions surface when the noise recedes. Do not suppress them. Allow them to appear and pass. This simple act of observation is the seed of clarity. It reveals how much of our restlessness comes not from the world, but from within. The second step is reflection. Once silence is tolerable, use it deliberately. Keep a journal. Write without agenda. Record impressions, questions, fragments of memory. Do not edit or censor. Over time, patterns emerge. Hidden concerns repeat. Genuine desires surface. The page becomes a mirror clearer than any conversation. What feels chaotic in thought often gains shape when written. This practice turns solitude into dialogue, not absence of voices, but conversation with the self. Walking alone offers another powerful form of reflection. Philosophers from Aristotle to Kant use daily walks to order their thoughts. Movement without distraction frees the mind to wander productively. Ideas connect, solutions appear, concerns shrink into proportion. Unlike hurried commutes or workouts with music, solitary walking opens a space where the pace of steps matches the pace of thought. Nature deepens the effect. A quiet path, a forest trail, or even a city park can soften the grip of daily pressure. Reading also belongs to this discipline. Not the quick scanning of feeds, but deep engagement with demanding texts. Solitude gives us the focus to absorb voices from the past without interruption. In this way, reading becomes a dialogue across centuries. The philosopher described books as conversations with the greatest minds, and solitude as the room where those conversations could be heard. To read deeply is not to escape company, but to exchange shallow chatter for profound dialogue. Another step is creative solitude. Whether writing, painting, composing, or building, the act of creation thrives when freed from constant judgment. In solitude, you experiment without fear of failure. You follow instincts that might be mocked in company, but reveal originality when pursued alone. The work need not be great to be transformative. The simple act of shaping thought into form strengthens individuality. It proves that solitude is not emptiness, but capacity.
Silence also supports practices of mindfulness. Sitting without distraction, simply observing breath or sensation, builds what psychologists call metacognition, the ability to notice thoughts instead of being carried by them. This skill, developed in solitude, transfers to daily life. It allows calm in chaos, perspective in conflict, and presence in conversation. What begins as private discipline becomes public strength. Longer retreats deepen the effect. A day without devices, a weekend without appointments, a week of intentional quiet. Such intervals act as resets. They allow the mind to settle into rhythms impossible to reach in short sessions. Insights appear slowly, often after hours of apparent emptiness. Just as water clears when left still, the mind clarifies when left undisturbed. Longer solitude is demanding, but offers rewards unmatched by any distraction. The practice of solitude is not about rejecting society, but about strengthening relationship with it. Those who cultivate solitude choose company more wisely. They are not driven by fear of being alone, but by genuine desire for connection. Friendships deepen because they are chosen, not clung to. Conversations become more attentive because the mind no longer craves constant validation. Solitude does not isolate, but refines. There is also resilience. People comfortable in solitude weather conflicts with greater stability. They do not collapse when relationships strain. They do not panic when attention fades. They carry within them a reserve of peace. This makes them paradoxically better partners, friends, and colleagues. By needing less from others, they are able to give more. The transformation follows a pattern. First comes resistance, the itch to escape. Then comes tolerance, the ability to sit calmly. Finally comes integration, the realization that solitude is not separate from life, but part of it. At this stage, solitude becomes less an exercise and more a habit. You seek it naturally, not as escape, but as nourishment. Practical exercises help. Turn off devices for an evening and sit with pen and paper. Take a walk without music and notice the rhythm of your steps. Read one demanding book slowly, allowing hours for reflection. Spend a morning without speaking, observing how the mind fills silence. Choose one small ritual and repeat it daily until it becomes natural. Small acts accumulate into transformation. The paradox is that those who master solitude also master connection. By knowing themselves, they understand others more deeply. By being whole alone, they meet others without neediness. Solitude practiced well becomes the foundation for empathy, authenticity, and creativity. What begins as private discipline reshapes public life. In the end, solitude is not a void to be feared, but a space to be cultivated. It is a garden hidden within every person, neglected by noise, but waiting to be tended. The tools are patience, reflection, and courage. The harvest is clarity, freedom, and depth. When we choose solitude intentionally, we stop fleeing ourselves and start meeting ourselves. In that meeting lies the transformation that history's greatest minds discovered and that each of us can rediscover today.